So a couple of months ago, these two political compasses were posted in my subreddit. They're graphs marking the fetishes of nearly 20,000 people based off of their position on the political compass. I interviewed the creator of this study, and I will be splicing in her insights throughout the video. Let's explore these compasses and see what we find. Now, broadly, we can just see that there's more right-wing associated fetishes for men and more left-wing associated fetishes for women. This furthers my theory that the real political divide in this country is actually between the sexes. Each fetish here is also denoted by how taboo it is. So the darker nodes are more taboo, and the less dark nodes are less taboo. So here, for example, you can obviously tell that vor is more taboo than latex. How the researcher decided what was and wasn't taboo was done in a previous study where she asked a bunch of people what they thought was more taboo or less taboo.
Imagine you have this kink and you have to announce to like a group of people or your grandma, like on a scale from 1 to awful, like how bad would this be?
Right.
And then I had people rate it as like basically as a proxy for tabooness, which means basically that the more taboo a thing is, the fewer people are interested in it. Which one is your weirdest one?
Mine?
Yeah, all the stuff you're into. What's the one farthest to the right on the graph?
Well, I have every fetish simultaneously. So,
Really?
yes,
So
every...
you're necrophiliac.
Yes. Yeah.
Now, because I have a bad case of monetization-ophilia, I'm not going to use some of the words here, but I'm sure you can read.
Who can say where the wind blows, where the night snows, na na na.
There are other caveats about the data.
So we have the confidence, and we also have the strength of the correlation. And so the correlations all have very low strength, but pretty high confidence.
Of course, you can just read the study itself where they have all the caveats there. So for men, 15,600 men were surveyed, and this is what we got. First things first, on the far left, we have group stuff. So for example, this looks like a perfect corollary for communalism. This kind of off-compass left-wing ideology that says everybody should share everything. It's almost like a hive mind. So group stuff seems like it should be in that same sphere. It makes sense. The politics kind of matches onto the fetish pretty neatly.
One thing to do is like whenever you're coming with theories or something, like pretend that you actually found the opposite finding.
Yeah.
And then like what would you... What kind of theories would you make up?
So this seems to make perfect sense, right? But the researcher here brings up a really good point, which is that every time you want to draw a conclusion based on some data, ask yourself what conclusion you would be drawing if the data was in the opposite corner. Now, if it was on the opposite end, we would probably be saying something like, well, of course, it's something like a harem, it's hierarchical, maybe there's one man and a bunch of women, and that strikes you as more of a right-wing idea. But I think this one makes sense just because most people's conception of what group stuff is more along the lines of consensual, communal, everyone's just sharing everything, fluids included. But I would take this point with you when we look at the rest of this data and we draw conclusions based off of it. Ask yourself what kind of conclusions you might be drawing if the data was saying the opposite thing, right? Okay, this is interesting as well. Along the authoritarian axis, you seem to be getting the difference between submission and domination. So, lib left, you have males submitting. And then off left, like almost like right above it, almost like it's topping it, you have males dominating. I think that this is maybe justification for all the porn that was drawn about my leftist characters. You know, where the off left doms the lib left. I don't know how to feel about that.
Lib left, essentially. We have females dominating. That's the defining fetish. But then on the right, we have males dominating. What do you think about that tension?
It's one of like the primary things I want to study right now is like what the fuck is up with like gender and dom submission stuff. And it's really interesting that it seems to be like a left-right thing. So I did like a date me survey where I had a whole bunch of people answer questions in an attempt to date me. And then they were scored. So I got to see like a couple thousand responses of a bunch of questions. And I got to see the correlation of like how dominant and submissive they reported being with like a lot of other stuff. And generally it seemed to be correlated with like being more extroverted, being more conscientious, being more outdoorsy, basically like sort of like physical activity.
Lib left in general here, for men especially, is just rife with male submission. I mean, male submitting, male use of toys, pegging, female domination. There's a lot less data in the auth-left quadrant, but we have things like sadism, males dominating, and females dominating.
What's the difference between male submitting and female dominating?
Sometimes people prefer females dominating and females submitting, like a woman dominating another female.
Oh.
Would be like your preference. So maybe you want to watch like a woman beat up a woman, but you don't want to watch men beat up a woman. Like it has to be woman on woman violence, right?
Excellent. I need to just stretch for some reason. I'm feeling a little bit of tension in my body.
There's not a lot of solidly right libertarian fetishes, and they seem to be more of a right unity thing, especially for men. I mean, these lib-right fetishes like necrophilia and incest, they're really just kind of like, you know, far right on the political compass. So auth-right is fascinating. We have stuff like 24/7 power dynamics, which is where someone controls someone else's life entirely 24/7 as a fetish. Okay, just at a glance. Scat, race play, pedo, bestiality, lactation, sounding. Sounding. I know what sounding is now. I wish I didn't. I hope you don't look it up.
Now, do I want to know what sounding is?
Do you want to guess from the name?
It's like when you are... I did in my fetish video, there was like a fetish where like you're attracted to music. I'm doing like a low ball.
Can I take back the life choices that led me to this position? No. No, I don't think I can. I think the only way forward is forwards. Nothing exists but what is in front of you. Crawl. All right. I think the thing to focus on in this quadrant is race play, because auth-right is the most stereotypically racist quadrant, right? But it seems that race play is their quintessential fetish. I think the obvious conclusion to draw there is that the more something is repressed politically, the more appealing it becomes sexually. This seems to track, though, right? Like, let's look at dirtiness. Dirtiness is authoritarian, but what do authoritarians hate? Authoritarians have a lower disgust tolerance. So stuff like things being dirty and unclean, someone who is naturally more politically authoritarian is probably more likely to dislike dirty things, which means, or which seems to imply at least, that the filth, the dirtiness, they're not attracted to dirt in spite of their disgust. They're attracted to dirt because of their disgust.
People on the left are into like group sex, fuda, pegging, female domination. Onto the right is a lot more like disgust oriented.
Yeah.
So it's almost like a gender to disgust spectrum. It's like, are your fetishes more gender oriented or are they more disgust oriented?
There were a lot less women surveyed, around 3,000 or 4,000 compared to the 15,000 men. What I mostly want to focus on here is that the male graphs and the female graphs are mostly pretty consistent. For example, race play in the male graph is roughly in the same quadrant or in the same general area as race play in the female graph. There are some differences you can compare and contrast for yourself, but mostly they remain pretty constant.
So what's interesting to me about this is that if you go to the female preferred fetishes on this list, which is, so this list is organized by the male versus female preferences.
Yep.
So the very top is the ones that the males prefer disproportionately, not like total number, but like compared to women. So even if like both of the numbers are very small, if the ratio is high, then it'll appear up there. So the top we have like, you know, anal, voyeurism, lactation, I guess, which makes sense. At the bottom you have masochism, male domination, male use of sex toys, rape play, asphyxiation, choking, heavy bondage, spanking. All of these are preferred by females more than males prefer anal sex. Which is the most male preferred fetish. So basically, women are super into BDSM.
So for females, on the farthest to far left, we have females dominating, and on the farthest to far right, we have males dominating. Okay, so it's not actually the farthest to far right. Even further right is race play again, this time seeming to be more of a right unity thing for women. Scat is the quintessential female authoritarian right-wing fetish. Okay, again, I have to point this out. An authoritarian fetish, the quintessential authoritarian fetish is age play, which the almost one of the most fundamental, you know, breaking points for the libertarian authoritarian debate is the age of consent. You know, you need that state. That's the argument. You need that state to enforce the age of consent, right? So authoritarians often make a case for protecting children. So, what's going on here? I mean, if age play was a libertarian fetish, we would say, of course, because that tracks, and it also fits with the ANCAP stereotype of having a child wife, right? But for it to be an authoritarian fetish, it goes back to this idea, in my opinion, and you can tell me what you think, but it goes back to the idea of the more something's repressed, the hotter it seems to be. Okay, so one thing that you should know is that the graphs you see here have been stretched along the authoritarian left, libertarian right axis, because the original data was basically like very linear. It looked like a line, and this was the original, data, and then this was how it's better, more fun representation in a graph.
It could be that just it's very correlated. Like if you tend to be more like libertarian, you tend to be more right or something. This part and this part tend to be like very much correlate with the amount those people like fetishes.
Unfortunately, we don't have every single user's exact political compass score. So, a moderate lib left is pulling that fetish just as much as a straight up anarcho-communist would. There was also no centrist option. So the ones near the center are the ones that are actually being pulled on by every quadrant instead of just ones that centrists might like.
So the things that are near the center, does that mean that it's about an even distribution of all of the different quadrants?
Yeah.
Right.
The correlation for one is weaker, which means that it's more likely to be sort of chance that we've got that result.
Mm-hmm.
So, but the farther away it is from the center, the less likely it is that we found that result due to chance.
Is it possible to have a truly centrist fetish? That's a question.
Most centrist, like missionary position.
Yeah, like missionary.
Is what seems to be the middle for women. I would say like anal's a pretty centrist fetish.
Okay, so looking around the center, there are some very taboo fetishes, which we'll call anti-centrist fetishes in the center, represented in the center. And then there are some non-taboo fetishes, which we'll call centrist fetishes. So centrist fetishes seem to be stuff like spanking, females submitting, latex, inanimate objects, choking, asphyxiation, positions besides missionary. Those ones are good examples of centrist. But then for the anti-centrist fetishes, we have the things I didn't mention. Yeah, that's right. As an anti-centrist, I recommend you... I'm not going to finish the sentence. Okay, I'm going to use this last section to just put some interesting sections from the article, as well as giving some interesting insights from the researcher here. Both men and women were more likely to be gay if they identified with the libertarian left quadrant. Who is surprised by this? It's still very interesting to see that seemingly get confirmed, though. There was no correlation between age and political identity on the graph. That's pretty strange because, you would expect, there's a stereotype, you start off as a leftist, and then you pay taxes once and you become a conservative. That seems to go against that stereotype. There wasn't a correlation in age found, except maybe lib lefts were slightly younger. This is a point about which quadrant had the most taboo fetishes. It seemed to be lib right for men and off left for women. But this is mainly because it was weighed down a lot by stuff like, incest and necrophilia, just on the line between lib right and auth right, so really it could have gone on either. And for women, stuff like sounding and vor are just like right on the line of being, authoritarian right as well. So it seems like the most taboo fetishes are either authoritarian center or right center. Thank you to the creator of this study. You can participate in more polls like these. I think she does them pretty frequently. Let us know what kind of studies you want to see. Stay taboo.